Bismillah wa salatu wa salamu ala Rasulullah. Assalamu alaikum and good evening. I'm here tonight to honor a promise that I made to my friends that I left behind in Gaza. September 18, 2024. The mass casualties began arriving in the mid-afternoon. Several victims of explosive injuries arrived, and 2 were critical. One was 10-year-old Wedged, a young girl whose house was bombed, resulting in a gaping chest wound and abdominal bleeding. As part of our protocol, we had to completely remove all of her clothes to ensure there were no hidden injuries, which left Wedged completely uncovered. Because she was also losing blood, she was shivering uncontrollably, which we often see in shock. There are no blankets, there's no sheets, or even gowns. So she lay there, shivering. The patient laying next to her, a 75-year-old woman with pneumonia, noticed us trying to find something to cover Wedged and literally cut her blanket in half with a pair of scissors she borrowed from the nurse so we could cover her Wedged, offering her some warmth and dignity. Being one of the more recent Canadian physicians to witness Gaza suffering firsthand, I followed in the footsteps of several of my colleagues who motivated me to take this journey, bearing witness to the atrocities of this genocide. Some of you I've met and some of you I haven't. When patients arrived at the emergency department of Al-Aqsa Hospital in Deir al-Balah in central Gaza, they came in waves. Groups of injured brought in all at once with zero warning, leaving us barely a moment to react. Adults were brought in, carried on sheets gripped tightly at the corners, and small children were brought in the arms of their loved ones, and often even strangers. Working on our hands and knees, we treated injuries that I couldn't even imagine. Crushed skulls, severe burns covering entire bodies, bullet wounds that have torn through organs, and limbs shredded or completely lost. Most of the patients we saw at the Al-Aqsa Hospital were children. Small, innocent, harmless. We lacked essentials, gauze, gowns, antibiotics, beds, even paper. Most of our work was done in pools of blood on the floor from different patients. Basic tools like oxygen monitors were broken, leaving us to guess patients' oxygen levels. Every night, I would make my way back to my room in the hospital where I stayed to rest and gather my thoughts. I would write the day's events and reflections and send them back to a family member in Canada. It was important to me that the stories of the people of Gaza, their suffering, their resilience, their compassion would not be forgotten. This evening, I wanted to share a few of these journal entries and reflections. September 19. 8-year-old Yazan was a young boy who suffered a catastrophic head injury in an explosion and had exposed brain matter and was declared a hopeless case, which in Canada would be classified as palliative or comfort care. He had several other injuries, including multiple sites of shrapnel in his lungs and abdomen, but despite him being palliative, multiple doctors from various specialties came down to offer care to his various wounds. I was especially moved by the care and compassion that the surgical team showed when stitching the deep cuts on his face. Despite throngs of patients in the hospital and multiple demands on their time, it was still important for them to restore his face to its original appearance, even though he would likely die before his cuts healed. They would be forgiven if they said this is a pointless exercise, but they still wanted to offer this child and his parents the compassion that bombs didn't give them as they waited for his death. Yazan spent more than 14 hours in the ER, and his family was by his side all day. His mom often fixed his hair, periodically wiped his bleeding nose, and adjusted his blanket to ensure his feet weren't exposed. All the while, both parents just stood beside his bed and stared at their son with a quiet dignity and pained expression. At one point, we rolled him onto his side to examine his chest wounds and change his dressings. This is when I realized he wasn't even laying on a mattress. He was laying on the hard composite material of a stretcher, and his parents, or someone, they brought a small piece of cardboard to lay under his back to soften things for him. This dying child couldn't even get something soft to lay on. At 1 a.m. the same night, I received a text message that simply said mass casualty. I went down to the ER again and met 6-year-old Asil, and this is what I wrote. 6-year-old Asil broke me. This sweet girl, the age and size of my eldest daughter, was laying on the floor, shivering out of fear and pain. She broke the femur of her right leg, which is one of the most painful bones you can break in your body, and an injury that needs surgery. She also had large and deep cuts to her pelvis, and her right index and middle fingers were completely blown off. Once she was stabilized, we brought her to the red zone where the orthopedic surgeons began straightening her femur before surgery. She was staying composed the entire time until the painful parts, and a shortage of pain medications prevented us from sedating her for this procedure. While the surgeon was splinting her and straightening out her leg, she repeatedly screamed in Arabic, "Oh, my uncle, please be gentle." And she cried repeatedly for her mom. When her mom finally arrived, she buried her head in Asil's face, kissed her repeatedly, grabbing her head and comforting her with "Mama is here" until the procedure was complete. Hearing a child cry for a parent who isn't there to comfort them is one of the hardest things to witness in Gaza. In all of my career, I can't recall a single time where a frightened or hurting child was left without a parent or even a loved one, a grandparent, an uncle, a friend by their side. But in Gaza, it's a daily reality, and each time it broke my heart. As a parent, your instinct is to hold your child and reassure them that they're safe. These children endured horrific injuries without warning or explanation, or the ability to be protected by the people they trust the most in this world. The effect this will have on them during such a critical time in their development is difficult to think about and write about. Now, the first time I cried in Gaza was on my 3rd day, September 6th. I remember it well. We were treating a 7-year-old girl with a severe head injury, and her tiny body lay there, and we could only watch as she was slowly dying. Hours later, her mother arrived. As I explained her daughter's prognosis, I could see the grief filling her eyes. And then, through tears, she pointed to the sky, and with conviction, she said, "This is Amrullah. This is the command of Allah." In that moment, I was reminded that God is the declarer of all things, the most just, the most merciful. I'd like to conclude with one final story. During my month in Gaza, I became close friends with our handler, Dr. Muhammad Al-Aqad, who we affectionately call Dr. Fawzi. He's a PhD in computer science and a lecturer at a now destroyed university. He was hired by our NGO to assist with logistics. Seeing Dr. Fawzi every few days was a breath of fresh air, as he was optimistic, often joking, teasing us. He spoke better Urdu than I did, and he would tease me in Urdu. But as the weeks passed, we saw his optimism slowly fade. On our last day together, I wrote this in my journal. I had a long conversation with Dr. Fauzi after lunch, where we sat beside each other on the small foam mattress where I sleep. He took a deep sigh and said, "Wallahi, I'm really going to miss you guys." I asked him when he thinks peace will come, and he lacked the optimism that he displayed when we first met on September 3rd. He sighed again, and he said to me, "I don't know when peace will come. Honestly, we are so tired. The men are tired, the women are tired, the children are tired. This is hell." I shared these stories tonight as a reminder. While many of us feel fatigued by the endless cycle of tragedy in Palestine, the people of Gaza endure this every single day. With each passing day, their situation grows increasingly desperate. Now is the time we must come together to raise our voices and advocate with every ounce of strength and privilege that we have. For every Wajd, for every Yazan, for every Asil, for my brother and friend, Dr. Fauzi. They are allowed to be tired. We are not. And in Gaza, it wasn't the sight of death or injury that caused me to weep. Rather, it was the many small acts of kindness, the moments of humanity in the midst of the devastation. A woman tearing her blanket for a child, a surgeon repairing a dying child's face, a small piece of cardboard for comfort. I share these stories to remind all of us that even a small act by a single person can make all the difference in the world to our brothers and sisters. My hope is that by sharing what I witnessed, you'll feel the urgency to continue advocating, to speak out, and to stand with our brothers and sisters in Gaza. I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rewards you for the effort you've made here to be here tonight, and for all our actions to weigh heavily on our scales on the day when the people of Palestine finally receive their justice. Assalamu alaikum.